Welcome, folks. We're just going to give it a minute for folks to come in through the waiting room. We'll start in just 1 minute.
Dan, can you still see the screen share? The little halo left my screen when it
Yes,
started recording. Okay.
looks great on my end.
Okay.
All right. Still a few people coming in. All right, I think we've got about critical mass in from the waiting room, so we'll go ahead and kick off. I want to welcome everyone to this LF Energy webinar from the Trolley project. It's an Ask Me Anything webinar, so we're very privileged to have some great experts on the Trolley project here with us who are going to be answering a large number of pre-submitted questions. So with that, I'm going to pass it over to Tori, who will take things from here.
Sure. And if you guys don't mind, I wonder if just to keep it short, I'll introduce you. So, everybody, my name's Tori McKeag. I am the the principal architect on the limit exchange portal product at GE Vernova, and one of the founding members of the Trolley project. Also with me here, one of my colleagues, I've got Aiden Short, who is one of the developers also on Limit Exchange Portal. And then you'll see we have Lance Reeves from SPP. He's one of the experts we have today. Lance, I don't know if there's anything you want to add that's important there. Yeah, cool. Well, we're also so we're ramping up a little bit. We'll have some more staff join. We'll also have William Holden from SPP joining later. I've also got Joshua Bauer from ICE New England. And then Christopher Atkins from MISO should be here as well. I think I don't know if he's sick or had car trouble or something this morning, but I assume he'll be joining any minute. So I've got some things on the screen here. I'm not going to kill you guys with slides. So I'll start with there's just kind of the standard LF Energy antitrust stuff. Make sure that we sort of acknowledge that there are industry competitors on the call, including me and other vendors. It's important for you guys to know Aiden and I are definitely not here to sell anybody anything, and it's important to recognize that we're careful about that stuff. So and if I do get questions that seem out of bounds because of commercial issues and things, I won't answer those. That being said, we'll be fairly transparent. Because I'll go into what the goal of today's call is. So we've got experts from the following companies, as I just mentioned. We'll see how there's some pluses and minuses to this format. So I did get some good questions pre-submitted. We'll start by going through those. The way this works, we can't really unmute you, so you guys have to type. If you have more questions, please go ahead and put them in the chat. And we will, and if they're easier ones, we may be able to get them through the chat. We do plan to document the responses to all this stuff on GitHub. And Christopher has already started this with some of the questions that we got from Grid Raven. So the other thing here, questions that are in scope, and this is one of the things I wanted to be clear on, is the goal is the spirit of Trolley is to help you integrate your systems. So yes, the Trolley spec is relatively generic, but that being said, obviously GE Vernova is a vendor for the systems that are stood up at ICE New England, MISO, and SPP. Each ISO has their own variations on rules and different strategies for how different ratings are dealt with. And I think it's more important, that we're providing you information about how things work. So some of these things may veer outside of what's in the Trolley spec, and that's okay. So, the goal is to see if we can get your questions answered as to how things integrate. That's why we have all these experts from the ISOs here. So it's a fair game ask. If I can't answer a question, we'll just say that. So yeah, I'm just trying to give you an example. I'm an SPPTO, and what do I do if my forecast ratings are, finish the sentence. Okay, so from there, I will stop with the slides, and I will go ahead and jump into the first question. So we've got a series of questions that were submitted by a company called GridRaven, who makes a dynamic line ratings product. So one of the first was, what is and this one I think I'll get because it's kind of low level. What is the appropriate limit type when only amps are known? So the answer here is you can send current, and I think we may have made a change here where some of the documentation was confusing, because it was also possible in the spec to send both current and an assumed voltage. What our software will do right now, because it's pretty common, you'll have things that only assume current. Operationally, the ISOs really need they really need MVA. So what we do is just use whatever the modeled voltage is, the modeled voltage for the particular facility, and convert it to MVA on the way in when you send amps. So with that being said, unless one of these guys tells me we have to turn that feature off, you can send amps and we convert it to MVA on the way in. Okay, so that one's relatively easy. Now, this one is kind of interesting here. So how do we represent probability in forecasts? And here, can I just making sure, because it isn't showing me the halo anymore. So one of you guys, Aiden, Lance, we got Mark from MISO England as well. Can you guys see the screen that I'm showing?
Yeah.
Yes, we can. Yeah.
Okay, thank you. Just want to make sure I'm not talking into the air. So here, what they're asking, so for DLR wind forecasts, they often have upper and lower probability bounds in their percentiles. Thus the forecasted line rate should reflect the probability. Currently, I do not see a way to provide limits with different probabilities. Possible that it could be defined as different monitoring sets. So here, and they suggested an output for like what would that look like. So this is kind of interesting. So they said, okay, you could have a mean DLR and then probabilities of different the DLRs in different levels. And so they're kind of asking like, well, how do we send that? Or here's another proposal they have here. It's like, oh, you could send an operating limit, with a probability associated to it. So I've been talking for a few minutes. I know how I would respond to that. I want to let one of you others any thoughts here.
So I think if you're looking at the probability, that's something
Yeah.
that the equipment owner or rating provider, whichever term you would like to use, that's something they would have to determine in-house, because as an ISO or an RTO, based off of NERC standards, the equipment owner calculates the ratings, provides all the ratings. We are just consumers of ratings. So I know in our EMS software, we have no ability to take into account probability or which probability to use. So for
Right.
that, LEP just needs to provide us with a clear-cut rating that would be used as an MBA.
Yeah. That's exactly one of the places I was going to go. One of the things when this question came up, Christopher and I talked about it, and so because there are a number of tools that are producing. This is a theme that's going to come up again in another one of the questions, where there's ratings, but kind of with caveats. So this tool is representing probabilities. There's another one that represents a quality value against the rating, and then it's like, well, what do we do with that? And right now, the ratings exchange just expects you to send, the equipment owner has to send the transmission provider, or the ISOs here, the rating you want them to use. So they don't really have anything they can do with the probability or quality information, so it's not part of the standard. one of the things I want to consider, and this is a longer term thing for Trolley, is probably not in EMS operations, but in markets for a long time. There've been kind of R&D discussions. I'm not talking necessarily just at GE Vernova. I'm saying like kind of in the university space across there, of looking at things like doing, you know, stochastic optimization for day ahead operations. And there I could see where having some kind of uncertainty band around things like ratings might actually be useful, but that's all very theoretical at this point. So I feel like that's the kind of thing that we would look at in the long term. But right now, yeah, what you need to decide is, if you're calculating ratings with an equipment owner, they need to reduce it to, okay, what is the equipment owner comfortable operating to, and that's what you want to send, and we don't really need anything else. So hopefully that's clear.
Yeah, can you hear me?
Hey, Christopher, there he is.
Hey.
Yeah.
Yeah, I dropped a link in the panelist chat just to show an example. So the essential response here was the spec, you know, being kind of aligned very closely with 881, with maybe a little bit of generalization. Really didn't have any focus on like confidence bands and that sort of probabilistic decision making, although, you know, certainly that's a part of the industry. And as you guys said, you know, the mandate from a ratings provider to a clearinghouse provider is, you know, tell me unequivocally what rating you anticipate, you know, for a particular period. What rating you propose that I should use for a given facility. And the clearinghouse can take multiple rating providers for a given facility and determine, you know, the most limiting, and also factor in current operational conditions that may result in override. And what you get out is an operating limit, right? So that's like the core semantics of what Trolley specifies. But we knew that we would want to allow for a richer representation of how the decision from the ratings provider was arrived at. And so we have this inputs used that's a super flexible. Yeah, Tori, I don't know if you can click that link on that chat or whatever, just to show the example.
Let's see, I don't know if is it showing me on the chat. Oh, yeah. This is for, it's this diff here, right? No.
Yeah, it's just, yeah.
Is it
It's
diff?
just the diff, yeah.
Okay.
It's just
Yeah.
So we updated an example that didn't specifically address the probabilities question, because you know, our core audience is probably not as interested in that as like something that is, you know, relevant, which, you know, we anticipated and we just didn't have great examples for, like the use of wind speed as input, wind direction, temperature, dry bulb temperature, however you want to represent that. So we just put a basic example. We're going to update this spec with this example, but I just wanted to highlight this was already there. And it also supports dimensionless values, because the unit is optional. So you could send those, and you know, depending on your ISO or whoever else you're, you know, doing Trolley with, you could send that today. Like, it should, if it's not used by them, it can be archived. There's questions about market transparency that I think will, you know, as we implement this across North America, we'll see more of that. So that, you know, how did you arrive at that value could be answered this way.
Yeah, and Christian had pointed out to scroll a bit down, and this is what we're kind of talking about is, I really like the idea here of using, right now we have this inputs use field. Christopher brings up some points. I think also, if we do decide to use, to take advantage of any kind of confidence band stuff in the future, what I can see today is we have these inputs used, which is really inputs to, it's important that you think about this as not necessarily inputs to your rating calculation, but inputs to what rating you're telling the ISO you want to operate against. And so that can include the confidence in your input calculation, or in your ratings calculation, excuse me. And I think what's interesting about using this field is, first of all, it gets archived. I think you know, as a rating provider, it shows the value of your ratings calculations. But I could see there too, you know, long term, being able to look and harvest this data. It tells us what's possible, and tells us what's available. So I would certainly encourage, you know, people developing ratings calculations products to put valuable and interesting things in those fields. And you know, I think it's right now they're fairly unstructured, but we may be able to really learn some things as we go past the FERC 881 go live. Okay, the next one: how to represent directional ratings at terminals. So, and this was, I think, a really great question, the way that that Christian asked this here. So I think I need to admit, the way that this works today is more than a little bit American biased. And I'll tell you what I mean by that. So right now, the only ISO that is using directional ratings at all, right? They have to be pre-modeled for certain lines that are going to support it, is ISO New England. And I was curious if you, like, either Joshua or Mark, give us some insight. Like, what are the kind of situations where we even use directional ratings?
So currently, we do not actually have directional ratings directly in our models, but the intention is to reflect the ratings associated with direction on elements in our model in the future. So
okay,
the way it works is the LEP model actually comes from a different model within our system. So what you would have is a transmission facility that's associated with, say, the in direction, and another one that's associated with the out direction. And so as a ratings provider, they would be able to identify, for ISO New England, the seasonal ratings for the individual network segments that are associated with the in direction, and also for the out direction. They would be able to provide current ratings that would be able to be utilized in real time if they choose to, and if it's applicable to AARs, if it's applicable to the ambient adjusted ratings requirements, then they would submit forecasted ratings based off of the directionality as well. And then the way that works is in our network itself, when it runs, it determines what's the flow on that element in the pre-contingent, and then it'll apply the applicable ratings to it. And in the post-contingent world, as it goes through different contingencies, it'll identify the direction of the flow, and then it'll apply the ratings associated with that direction within the contingency analysis software. It is not very common, Tori. It's only a handful of elements that we have, and most of those are based on a component of that line for monitoring, like a CT or a VT, that says, well, if it flows in this direction, this is the limit. If it flows in the direction, it's 10 times higher.
Right. So, and I think the impression I always had from you guys is, like, it's not very common, as in this is probably less than 10 resources or so, right? Like, it's in about that magnitude. Less. Yeah. Okay.
Right now, if we were to model it right now, it'd be on 3 to 5 facilities.
Okay.
That's it.
Okay. Yeah, and I want to so I want to share with some of you guys that may not be familiar. I happen to be familiar with what Christian is talking about here. So because it's a bit of a different perspective. Yeah. So he's got a good question in the chat. so that everyone can see it, tend to agree. Let's talk about this as a term proposal. So, Christian, if this makes sense, like, and I answered Christian's Christian's question in the chat because he shows like, okay, this is a thing that you could have, and there are operating footprints where people actually do stuff like this, where they could have these big collection of ratings. I know that this is done in Australia, and I assume this is probably also done in certain parts of Europe. And what he's suggesting here, and I think this is, so to be clear for anybody on the call, this is not something anybody working on FERC 881 needs to worry about. But for your education here, the way that he's describing this is when you model a line in SIM, which is required if you're in Europe in the ENSO-E footprint, and you're participating in CGMES, so everybody kind of has this. Each end of your line is called a terminal. Like really any device that you model, the physical connection points are called terminals, and the terminals have an identity. And so what he's suggesting here is that we could use the terminals to have a really a very precise way of referring to direction, is referring to the terminal identities, and have that be somewhat of a, I don't know if it's a good saying or not, but like a first-class citizen of the spec. And my gut says is if we have to use these ratings exchanges in Europe or Australia, we probably want to add support for that kind of thing. Right now we don't have it, so in the US we tend to use like the in and out directions. That's kind of like how you would see buses and buses and trains. We pick an arbitrary direction and we call it inbound or outbound. Like I don't know. I think I could see where if you had a lot of these, it becomes fairly messy. So what we elected to do for the US for just these 3 to 5 resources is like having that kind of in and out specialization is good enough. But I could see where, Christian, I'd like to work on this some more on GitHub as a proposal, especially if you have a European use case. We talk about that more. Like, is this common enough that this is important to have these kind of things? Christopher, go ahead.
Yeah, thanks. When we talked about this with directional ratings very early on, my basic assertion was that the trolley specification should remain as agnostic as possible to what you're providing ratings for. The core thing, right? We refer to it as a resource ID, power system resource in the SIM parlance. A terminal is a thing in SIM, right? It has an MRID. It has, usually a constructed natural name, in A and B or in out. Like it depends on, the kind of colloquial language that's being used by operators around that facility. There's nothing that precludes sending a rating for a terminal in lab, right? So, with MISO's deployment, we sort of took a logical approach in the sense that we have facilities where, like, your series, the things you own in series could be in different segments on a particular facility. So we just said, look, we'll just, and we operate to like we don't bind undirectional in our EMS. So we just took like a logical segment from each ratings provider and used that to determine the final operating limit. But we do exchange with a lot of adjacent RCs, and the view is like, I'm giving you the lowest of the directional ratings if we were to be soliciting such a thing. I don't mean to belabor the point, but I really want to highlight that I think that this proposal can be accommodated today. The main challenge is, how do you distinguish conditions, like topological conditions? We've sort of punted on that, I think. Tori, you'd agree with that, sort of by and large?
Oh yeah, very much so. Yeah.
Yeah,
Yes.
in the forecasting regime, obviously, anyone that's using the trolley spec for real time, it's implied. But having like forecasted ratings for different topological conditions that can be employed, based on outages or known switching conditions, planned or unplanned changes, that's something that we need to work toward, I think, going forward. But the way we sort of accommodated that was to try to be as like agnostic as possible and just say, it's a power system, like a given topology for a facility can be considered just a power system resource. And it really comes down to, like, in the exchange between two parties, like, how do you represent that? How do you nominate it? Rather than trying to solve for all the different things you'd need to represent to sort of solve topology using, real-time breaker status, and then determine, the most limiting rating. Like we sort of just punted on that and said, give the conditions that you anticipate a name, and a unique ID, and have at it.
Right. And I can see the thing is, though, I think as a compromise where that comes in and it works okay, is that even for those things that have the built-in topology conditions, that's a fairly small number of resources. And what we've done today with this is really say, okay, that having these kind of names is a way where we're not letting the complexity of the corner cases blow up the complexity of the whole spec. And I guess one of the questions I have, Kristen, because to your point, Christopher, like, yes, obviously you can send the MRID to the terminal. I actually don't think that's enough. We have systems. I happen to know of an EMS system that we do in Australia, where apparently there is lines where we support having a separate rating for each direction and a separate rating at the terminals. And I still don't. I'll be honest. I still don't really understand what that means. But my question is, like, that's kind of crazy. Is that one facility or is it 100 facilities? And how does that, if I look at what Christian typed in the chat, my question is like, how big of a problem is this? And Christian, I think one of the things that would help is, because obviously a lot of this is possible, but how much of it is practical? How much of it is needed in an actual ratings exchange? And I think if you want to work with us, if improving this representation does become a proposal, I think we'd want to see, okay, is this a real interop problem? And remember that our goal of the trolley project is about the data exchanges that need to happen, not necessarily what you can calculate, right? That's kind of different. Do you actually need to do you need to send this data to, a TSO in Europe, for example, depending on what they're doing with it? I guess it'd be my question. Okay. There's some more here. We'll go through. These are some general questions. There's a good one here. How does the schema map to or work with SIM? There's a good kind of discussion here that you can certainly use SIM MRIDs as your resource identifier, and we've kind of discussed this. One of the things I want to pull out is, as a reality here, is for the companies that we're working with, they're here on this call. So the GE Vernova product is configurable as to which ID is sort of your primary. So, and hopefully I've got these right. I think so. MISO is going to be using the SIM MRIDs from their model manager. SPP is going to be using their netmom keys. Lance, do I have that right? And ICE New England, I wasn't sure, like, are you guys using your netmom keys or were using the NX IDs?
So I don't know where that configuration lives within LEP to identify
Okay.
what the primary key is associated with it.
Yeah.
But we are working towards a source implementation, which would contain MRIDs. But I
Okay.
think probably talk with you offline about that.
Okay. Okay. That's fair. That's fair. All right. So you can certainly, from the point of the specification, you can certainly, you certainly can use SIM. The reality of how we design the specification is in the the United States is distinctly different than Europe in this. SIM penetration is kind of spotty at best, and that's one of the reasons why, if you look at the if we look at the header section for the things you submit, there's a bunch of alternate identifiers because most US grid operators have, a bunch of different software systems and all the devices have different names for the same thing, and they're a little bit stuck with the mess. So we end up with having different names for things. The LEP product can store a bunch of that information, and you can actually override the name you're using as your primary. But yeah, assuming the two parties agree, there's nothing stopping you from using SIM MRIDs to identify your equipment. Okay. This was a good one. This is kind of low level and technical. We're talking about adding support for this in the spec. The URN UUID is a good one. Most people on the call won't know this. The EIC, this is a specifically a European concept. There's these ENSO-E, it's kind of like, NERC assigning an ID to something. There's these ENSO-E codes for a bunch of the items in the network. So, I could see us adding support for that kind of thing.
Tori, actually, I just to drill down a little bit on that. So the core suggestion was use URN for UUID, and that my understanding is that that's when we're talking about MRIDs, they're very often represented as UUIDs, and the URN format for that is canonical, perhaps, in CGMES. I don't know for sure. But the other URN presented there, like there's not one, like NASB doesn't have one, NERC doesn't have one. Like you can register a top level URN namespace and then create names beneath that. And it does, this is germane to Trolley because, it would be good to have like a glide path, like, hey, do it this way. And it'll be easier for everybody because it's a convention over configuration kind of thing, right? We're not going to tell you how to name things per se, but here's a good idea, right? Here's some common practices. And so in the spirit that this was offered in, we sort of created a PR yesterday to sort of add more examples of good names to the spec examples. And like the Java reverse DNS name for, because we have, their EIN is essentially like the NCR with NERC or OATI's web registry, the NASB, that they implement NASB's wholesale electric quadrants electric industry registry. we call them NERC IDs, right? MISO, SPP. But those are names that have a naming authority. A spec talks about naming authority. Being able to nominate a naming authority in a conventional way, I think, is a good thing for us to do. So I'm just want to highlight that we're trying to make that convention something that's codified into the examples, since we can't specify how to do
And I think Christopher, I don't know if you noticed. So I want to say thank you to Christian, who is very interactive with us in the chat. I think, like, because I highlighted this, I was going to give you this question on the. I'm not sure I got the context of where this one came from. I have to open the original email, but I don't know if you have any words to say. It sounds to me like Christian's kind of on the same page here. That, you know, adding a lot to the resource ID is probably a bad idea, but I don't know if you remember if there's any more context to add to this question here, Christopher.
Yeah, I don't have that context offhand to respond intelligently.
That's fine. That's fine. That's fine.
Hey, Tori, for that resource ID, based off of how you model your system and how you set it up, you might, if you're utilizing like a NetMon composite ID, if you have separate LNs, which are segments associated with the line, you have unique identifiers associated with that. So your construct, your resource ID, and that would be different for each direction.
Yes. Yes.
And so there are situations where you would just end up with unique resource IDs for like the in and out directional items based off of the model itself.
That's what LEP does today. It's like if a facility is modeled to support directions, you know, like in DynRTG, like if you have separate directions, then it appends minus in and minus out to the resource IDs. Okay.
Just one more thing on that, right? As you highlighted earlier, different clearinghouse providers are adopting different unique ID conventions, right, or requirements rather, for the primary value that must be present. We accommodated that by using SIMS names functionality to support alternate names, either at like debug time where you're doing an exchange and you're trying to make sure everything's lined up and you've got the mappings correct on your side. In a lot of cases, that conventional name is what people use. That's when they pick up the phone and call each other in operations. They're saying, 859.1_A, like that's the thing. And it's got all of that name, that composite name, that surrogate for, all those individual values is commonly used. So we want to we can't tell, the exchange can't have a strong opinion. We don't have the ISO or INSO-E kind of authority to say thou shalt do it this way. But I think what we've landed on is a flexible format that lets you use the names that your clearinghouse provider insists on, but then also provide, has accommodations for contextualizing that with other names from different authorities and from different perspectives. And, whereas MISO will use an MRID as that primary value, we also, the detailed snapshots and proposals can have the operator friendly names in them as well, so that as we're debugging mapping, that's one use case for it. Runtime troubleshooting is another, but we want to have that contextual information available. Thanks.
Yeah. So this question is interesting here. We're going to come back to in and out of service with the next series of questions. But I guess I'd ask, within and out of service, does we probably need to discuss, because I know this came from Greg Raven, like, what do you mean by that? Do we mean that the entire line is out of service? Do we mean that it's like a multi-configuration line? So for example, we have there's a number of these in ISO England where they've got underground cables packed in trays, and they can turn off individual cables inside the trays. Like it's a bit of a different beast. Because I'm thinking about this in terms of rating calculation. Like if a line is down, well, it still has a rating. So what is in and out of service? Like if we're trying to communicate outages, that's a different thing. That's not really what Trollie's intended to solve. So I think, Christopher, I don't know if you want to add anything. So I know you had some context to this, but
just briefly, like forecasting ratings is new for our industry. I mean, new-ish, right? in this kind of global way. Obviously, outage coordination comes into that, as does, you know, like real-time conditions that may persist, that were not, you know, they were unplanned. So we have some things, you know, like as I mentioned before, you can create a couple of you can create multiple inboxes by creating new resource power system resources, which represent, you know, those alternate conditions, and you could use those forecasts in your contingency analysis and whatnot, your outage studies. So there's sort of that, right, where you know, what's the, you know, most limiting topology, or, you know, given these conditions, like in using that, so that we're trying to make the data, you know, transferable without having like super strong opinions on how you nominate it. So that's where the conventions that are already extant in the exchanges between the operators, between the RC and the TOP, or the TOP and the TOP, or the RC and the RC, like they already have ways to talk about these things, and we're sort of not going to come in and say, you know, it has to be, you know, use this, you know, UUID-v4 over the phone. The temporary AAR exception is another API affordance that addresses system conditions that's specifically meant to be used to cover the case where you have a facility that's normally meant to have ambient adjusted ratings, dynamic ratings, but for some, you know, operational planning interval, you anticipate not having the ability to ambient adjust or provide a dynamic rating. Therefore, you can provide a static rating that will be forecast in that for that interval. It also serves, from the transparency archive mandate perspective of the order 81. It also serves to document like why you were sending a static rating. So if your solution in real time begins to flatline a rating because, you know, sensors are bad or whatever, or, you know, the out of tolerance, then you can, you know, add a temporary AR exception to the exchange to say, hey, I began using static rating at this time for this long, or even I don't know when the situation is going to be fixed. So like that can be, no end date can be supplied. You know, and then of course there's seasonal rating exchange, which was, you know, required a lot of, you know, how do you represent, you know, alternate topologies in the seasonal rating. And so again, we go back to like just landing on this common denominator of it's a different power system resource, and the relationship is not structured between those and the facility outside of, you know, the naming that you might provide. That was a long-winded response. Sorry, Tori.
It's all right. Here, I think I'll move on. So let's see, we get more.
Hey, Tori.
Yeah.
I would just like to point out one thing. So if you're looking at it from a forecasted perspective, each network segment can only receive a single forecast submission. So you're not going to end up with forecasted in service, forecasted out of service, bifurcated being sent to you.
Yeah.
So if you have a planned outage for something, then potentially you could receive a forecasted value that represents its companion element being out of service starting at whatever time that planned outage is.
Sure.
But there's not a dual submission path to always provide in and out via the limit exchange portal for forecasted or real time.
Yeah. So I see a good question in the chat, and I think actually, so I want to switch us over because I've given Christian a lot of floor. Like I will, because some of the other questions are going to address temporary R exceptions, which I think if you guys see Christian's question in the chat, like kind of goes directly to that. So we'll talk about that. I think we'll talk about that some more here, somewhat naturally, as we go. So this series of questions was sent to us yesterday, I believe, and so this was sent to us from GE Vernova services team, and some of the things were sent without context. So I think I will decode some of these for you guys, because yeah, they needed a little bit more. So what she's talking about here, how to make temporary R exceptions when DDLR has ratings overcall quality other than 0. Should we send any of the good ratings or create a temporary R exception? So here's kind of what she's going for here. So there's really in this first question, there's two things going on. One is that our ratings calculation product produces a quality value, much like you would have like a quality for a SCADA measurement or something. And I think some of these is some of this is meant to be a representation of it's a sort of a summary of the probability kind of stuff that for example the Grid Raven product produces. And so what they've asked me is like, oh, how do we send the quality to the ISO? And then the other one was, okay, at what point is, do we decide to create a temporary R exception? Because one of the quality values that the ratings computation product will spit out is one where it says, I gave up on computing an AAR, so this is just a seasonal rating. And based on what we've discussed so far, I think we're consistent on this. One is that they have to talk to, so the equipment owner needs to be comfortable with, okay, whether or not the quality value coming out of the ratings calculation tool, if it's of questionable quality, is it a rating that the equipment owner is comfortable operating to, right? Like, what does that actually mean? Because again, from the perspective of Trolley, you could send the quality as an input, but then you would also have so here I'm going to kind of address this in two parts here. I'm really focused on, well, what to do with quality first. But the first one is stating, all right, that it is between the ratings calculation vendor and the equipment owner whether or not a rating is good enough to operate to, and then they decide to either send a proposal or create a temporary R exception based on that. And is that consistent with how you guys feel about it?
Yeah, Tori, there's we have a property for a rating, a given period rating proposal. Yeah. Poorly named, but it's called current-source. And if I could share my screen.
Yeah, go ahead.
I don't think I can take it. Can you?
Oh, do I have to give it up? Okay, yeah, sure.
And you can have it right back as soon as I.
Yeah.
Let's see. All right. Let me know when you see that.
Yeah.
Okay. So, and this is just context for what's in the spec today. It's maybe not it's not sufficient to answer the question that was posed, but I want to give it as background. So, looking at, particularly from MISO's perspective, we're doing our darndest to keep all our ratings in real time over our kind of traditional OT links. So we're going to use ICCP for that. And the question comes up, like, what is the analog in this kind of web API based exchange to indicate, like the same things, right? So we have this table that maps some ICCP quality codes to or the quality class called current source in ICCP, and this is kind of how we see them lining up, right? And the estimated being, and this is a reused type in real time and in forecasting. So there may be different interpretations more appropriate to a forecast, but this is what we have right now. That's in the spec already that can be used to indicate, where things are. with your forecast, how you arrived at it, and like if you're using a static rating. It's not strictly required by the order or the exchange. This is an optional property, but it sort of serves the same purposes that the ICP quality class of current source serves. Thank you. How do I
All right. On there. Okay. So now if I reshare, make sure I get the right stinking screen. There we go. Okay. So I guess the thing I wanted to make sure we're agreed upon is that it's ultimately, so assuming, let's say, because and to be honest, I actually really don't know. Let's say that due to, kind of internal data conditions, our, ratings calculation product can produce, 3 or 4 different quality values, right? So none of them completely map to what that enum we have there today, Christopher, right? Like they're based on kind of some internal calculation rules, certainty of, I don't know, wind speed data or something like that. So if that's the case, then I would assume that the statement I made before, that if there is any degradation in quality, whether or not that represents or should represent a reversion to the seasonal ratings or some other static recourse rating, should really, that's not a determination that you as the ISOs should make, right? Like that should be on the ratings provider. And so that's where the quality thing is, like, yes, it's interesting for them to send you guys that, but the most important thing for them to keep in mind is that is the equipment owner comfortable operating to that based on the quality, and they need to make a decision that it's the AAR is either good or they're going to recourse ratings.
Yeah, and I would, that echoes what Joshua mentioned earlier about the TOP's responsibility to determine the rating. The other thing I would add is that if that current source property, if you want to supply this information, you can put it in inputs used if there's a mismatch with like what you're producing and what current source affords as far as those quality flags. So if you have a numeric value that you use in your product, then by all means use the inputs used.
Yeah. So then the other thing that's kind of interesting here, and this has come up, there's another part of this question. So kind of the scopes of temporary R exception. So the questions as I've had it spoken to me are, hey, if we go down to what if we have a seasonal rating for only, let's say, the hours in the second day? Do we still have to send the temporary R exception? Which to me is, I don't think that I find it doubtful that that's a totally realistic scenario. The weather forecast providers don't usually work that way, but that being said, that it certainly the data structures and things support it. And my assumption, what I told our developers here was, hey, you either send a complete forecast or you don't, right? That it's kind of all or nothing. You wouldn't want to have like a jerk in the middle where you're having forecasts and then falls off the end.
Yeah, I think that's worth emphasizing. That is part of the specification, that whatever the clearinghouse decides is the sufficient number of intervals for a forecast.
Yeah.
Per the order, that's 240. I think for most of us, I think ISO New England is using 72 hours. The specification says, given that knowledge, like a complete forecast, a contiguous forecast that covers that entire end-to-end period expected by the clearinghouse provider is what is acceptable for a given power system resource to meet your ratings obligation for that power system resource. It supports like missing, like if you don't have a forecast for a particular piece of equipment, you can not send that and still have your proposal accepted. It's just that you have these missing facilities, and that's when the recourse methodology at the clearinghouse would take over. But I tend to agree with you, Tori. I think I would not consider those few hours where you didn't have a reasonable forecast. Like, I think that's a judgment you're making, right? Like, as a ratings provider, you're saying, I don't have high enough confidence in my hourly forecast at that time to give it to you, but I'm still ambient adjusting as to the best I can, right? I would think of it more, and I don't think an auditor would be like, where are those 4 hours of temporary AR exception?
Right. And I think too, certainly the way you guys are using it is the 10 days, like, you could make a judgment call. One of the things I told them was, hey, for let's say days, I don't know, 6 through 10, for example, like, you can probably tolerate some bad quality, and it's not really gonna affect much. I mean, there's most of that data is not being used for much, that becomes a judgment call again to make with the equipment owner.
Yeah, that's a really good highlight here. This is a best effort stuff, right? Yeah. And in reality, when there's congestion forecasted or in real time, there are all kinds of existing processes to address that, right? Looking for relief. Can you get more capacity? We've got different, like, it's beyond the continuous ratings, right? We've got all this stuff to deal with that. So it doesn't have to be, I think that, like, no one's even going to notice probably if it's 3 hours on an uncongested facility 3 days from now, and it's only one forecast, like, because we do this hourly, right? Like, I don't think anyone's ever going to see it. So I want to make sure we don't lose the forest for the trees.
Yeah. Okay, so I brought up temporary AR exceptions because I'm going to come back to this. So there's another flavor of this. So here they say, if we switch a facility rating from AAR to seasonal, do we send that as a normal AAR rating for clearance with reason? There's no way to send a reason, or do we? So what the FERC order says, and the way that we've designed the API, there's this concept called temporary AAR exceptions. So and here I'm going to give a description. You guys can jump in and beat on me or add. The language the FERC order uses is that there's this idea that they call it, I think, the reliability safety valve. So it's like you're supposed to be, using AARs until you have a good reason why you're not. And as soon as you're not, you have to document what rating you are going to use, the start and end of when you're not using AARs, and why. So, and there's a bunch of whys. So what we support right now is there's the thing, and it's kind of a staple thing. You can create a new temporary AR exception. You can update it to close it off. And you say, all right, I am for such and such a resource from this period to this period. Hey, we're going to operate at this rating. And we specify a reason, and this reason gets documented by the clearinghouse and stored in their 5-year archive for market monitors and other people to look at. Right now, this thing is just freeform text, so I can answer kind of an easy question from Christian there. Like, one of the things we talked about is a link to an outage resource, which is a possibility, and we didn't. Right now, we kind of stuck with a free text reason because there's all kinds of reasons. So I'm going to talk about software outages here in a second, in which case there would be no outage record, like physical equipment outage. I've kind of wondered, is there value in adding a link to or some kind of identifier for an outage people can look up in other systems later? I know when I've talked to the US ISOs, is a little bit messy. Like, I think that there's a number of possible systems this could be in, so you would actually need quite a bit of information. That's why we've kind of started with, okay, there's free text. But yeah, this is a very version 1 way of looking at the spec. And so going back to the question, here, I want to make sure I have the right email up. Yeah. If you switch from AARs to seasonal for a facility, you have to create a temporary AR exception. Now, here's where this question gets really interesting. Is what this same team, I happen to know, has asked me, is to say, like, well, what if for a particular hour, our weather forecast provider is down, and then it comes back up for the next hour. So what do? Do we have to create a temporary AR exception for every resource, and then, and then close it off on the next, go update the temporary AR exceptions. So let's say it comes back in the next hour, we go update the temporary AR exceptions to say, oh, this is okay. And I guess that one gets a little bit interesting. So
one thing to note there is that you can apply temporary AR exceptions after the fact.
Yeah.
Right. So the question is, like, as a rating provider, what's my recourse rating when I don't have an ambient condition forecast available to produce the thing? And that comes in 2 flavors. One, I don't have an ambient condition forecast at all, or I'm missing hours, which we think is probably a pretty rare condition. And we have a question in the Q&A about that latter thing. I'll first say that, the main thing to realize here is that this is, when we talk about temporary AR exceptions, by and large, this is about compliance, right? It's about recording why you weren't using an AAR for some period of time in one of these submission pathways. So you have to be able to, like, automatically fail with your rating system to a recourse if you're missing data, or data is corrupted or whatever, the calculation crashes. In that case, if you can't produce a forecast, you certainly could just not send it. In which case, your clearinghouse provider is going to apply their recourse rating methodology, whatever they've set that up to be. And then you really should, at that point, document why you weren't sending the forecast at all. If you choose to send a forecast, you still should. That's all seasonal ratings, right? It's not an ambient adjusted forecast. I should say it's recourse ratings, whatever that means for you, which is typically going to be a seasonal rating. Then yeah, like that's your prerogative. That's what you've decided you want to operate to with that submission for however long that applies in your operating horizon. So in that case, yes, you need to document that you didn't use AARs even though you were supposed to be, and that's what the temporary AR exception after the fact can do. If you're trying to create operational awareness for, like, I think this is going to be a persistent condition. Like, I've got an update from my weather provider that they're on an outage and they don't have an ETA for return, then you can, like, put an end date on that temporary AR exception of a day from now, or it just really, you have to make a judgment call there, like, on how long you want to use recourse ratings, or you anticipate sending them. But again, you can go back, and once you start sending them, stop that, like, put that end date on there and say, this is why we were using it for these these hours.
Yeah, hopefully that's helpful. And it occurs to me another idea that I would assume you guys as clearinghouse providers would be fine with is let's say when we come up with another scenario, another thing that could happen. So if let's say they're using some weather service, and the weather service goes down for an hour, what might be operationally ideal, like ideal in that scenario would be, well, let's say this becomes again, another discussion between the rating calculation software and the equipment owner and their comfort level. So if we're talking about forecasts, we could say like, well, how comfortable are we with a 1 hour old stale forecast? Because the reality is like, okay, if the weather forecast hasn't changed much, you might be okay with computing AARs on a 1 hour stale forecast or not. This is a discussion that that again, between somebody, a vendor providing rating calculation software and the equipment owner. And hey, if the equipment owner decides like, yeah, we can use stale weather forecasts for an hour, I mean, that's okay, right? Like that's something that they could at least okay from the perspective of the clearinghouse provider, right? The ISOs. It's ultimately the equipment owner's decision.
It's a great call out, right? You've got the ratings provider's recourse methodology, which may include reusing old temperature forecasts or even reusing wind forecast predictions, or just reusing the forecast that they last sent in, right? And putting a seasonal rating on that last hour, right? Like that's really up to them. That's the important autonomy and responsibility of the rating provider. At the clearinghouse, there's flexibility as well when when the things corrupt or missing. What's our recourse rating methodology at the clearinghouse side? And in MISO's case, we want to give the prerogative to the rating provider to say, well, we can use your last forecast, your last known good forecast for some period of time. You tell us for how long, right? But again, you're putting the rating provider in the driver's seat as best you can when you're not able to coordinate on actual data in the exchange.
Okay, so get to, I want to suggest these, the questions 4 or 5 are questions about GE products, so I think I'll leave those. But question 3 is more about timelines. So I guess do we know? So I happen to know where this came from. This is somebody who's, it's an SPP, or we're doing software for somebody who's an SPP member and a MISO member. So did Christopher, do we have that information public for MISO now? Like how far in advance? So like if I'm submitting a forecast for, I'm sorry, my brain's in Pacific time. If I submit a forecast for 11, which is 53 minutes from now, like would I have had to submit that by 9:30?
So we did send our timings to FERC in September. Those were accepted. They're published in our facility ratings methodology, which is available to all of our TOs and TOPs that attend our monthly workshops. So here I'd ask the vendor to reach out to their customer to get that information from MISO.
Christopher, you cut off there.
Sorry. I'm hedging a bit because I don't remember exactly where it landed, frankly. I've had a lot of discussions with RC to RC where the timings are going to be different than the original ratings provider. So I don't want to say something here and then be wrong. So again, I just go to your customer. If this is a vendor question, go to your customer that's in MISO's footprint and get our ratings methodology document from them. They should have that available. It's published in the workshop.
Okay, and it looks like I had more questions, but I didn't realize how much time we had or how little. Apparently, we're 10 minutes over. I thought we had 90 minutes. So, thank you, Dan, for hosting. I think we better wrap it up. So, and thank you for everybody who stayed. This will be recorded, or it has been recorded, and we'll try to go answer some more of this stuff. We'll write up some more answers to these things on GitHub. Then say thank you to everybody who joined. I saw William when I finally scrolled down. Cool. Hopefully this is valuable to people. If not, just a reminder to anybody who's still on, you guys can always post questions on GitHub, and I will get the experts on to answer that stuff.
Yes, and we'll send an email out once the recording is ready and let you all know where you can access that and also all the relevant links so that if you have additional questions, you can reach the appropriate people. Perfect. Well, thank you all so much for joining, and we hope to see you at another webinar soon.
Thank you. Have a good day.